That's good. And yeah, it's going to be a very simple project, just so to demonstrate the process, because I essentially do this with every single one of my projects. I either get a PDF, or I have to draw it up myself, or I get a CAD file. So whenever I start a project in the real world, I am not given a BIM file. I'm not given a Revit file or an ArchiCAD file. Most of the time, I'm sketching, drawing on top of some drawing from like the 80s, which was done by hand, or I'm getting a CAD file which was done in the 90s or the 2000s, essentially. So we're going to go through that process. We're going to look at Blender. We're going to import a CAD file, and then we're going to just very simply model through a very small project and just go through the steps that you get it into a BIM format, essentially. So basically what we're doing is we're importing and using as a reference the CAD to create a native IFC file, essentially. Go for it, Petru.
One thing, guys, before we go, there are two things you have to do. You have to do, because you are here. You are getting a lot of value today. So you have to share, to repost this live stream. So more of your friends will be able to see this, because this is going to be invaluable information. Why not share with your friends? Come on, do them a favor. I'm sure they will buy you a beer when you meet them next time. And the second thing, I see we have people from India, from Cameroon here. Where are you from? It would be very interesting to see where are you from, guys? How many countries do we have here? From how many places in the world? Thank you for that. I appreciate you making this favor to us, because, like I said, it's also a favor for us. But mostly it's for your friends. Okay, keep that in mind, for your friends. Thank you. Now, Lloyd, you can go on.
Alrighty, yeah. Yes, and I'd say this workflow, if you work with CAD, or if you work with IFC or any sort of BIM program, this is the same process, the same workflow you would probably use in another program. This is just what it looks like inside of Blender BIM, and it's the process I use. So this is not necessarily the only way to do it, but it's definitely a way to do it. It's a very simple explanation for today, because anything more complicated will take hours and hours. But we're just going to go through some very simple concepts of taking CAD and making it into a BIM model, essentially. Yeah. So I think that's it. I'm going to get going, and I'm going to share my screen. And we're just going to go through my preamble about what I'm setting up, so that if you want to do this at a later stage, you can come back and have a look. But it's very straightforward. Everything we're using is free and open source, so you shouldn't have to pay for anything that you see today. But obviously, it's within your right to choose to pay for things if that's your preference, or if that's a program you would use. Righty, I'm going to go and get going. I'm going to share my screen there, and then I'm going to open up my NanoCAD over here. Righty. Petru, can you just let me know, is the screen shared all right? Let's hide that. Yeah, okay, cool. I'm just going to assume everything is all right and get ahead. So what I've got here opened is NanoCAD 5, which is a free version of NanoCAD. It's the program I use for any 2D drafting at the moment. I'm switching between this and LibreCAD and a few other things that are not important for today. The only thing you need to know is that you're going to be starting with a DWG file or a DXF file. So when we want to bring this into Blender and Blender BIM, it needs to be a DXF format. So this is essentially a little DWG, very simple, that I've prepared just for today, which just has a very simple room with a little bathroom. And it has some contours, and then we've just got our steps that we're going to go through once we import this into Blender. So you need to have not a DWG, but a DXF. So for our purposes, you need to go and export or save this thing as a DXF, right? So I've got one there. I'm just going to say save. I'm going to replace my DXF, and it's done, right? So I'm going to close this. It's all sorted. And then here again, I've already done this. From here, you want to open up your Blender program, essentially. So I'm just going to be going through this. You can use different versions and different types. And I'm just going to go through a process to do this. But just make sure that if you want to follow along, it's best if you're using kind of a similar process to me, essentially. At any point, you could probably deviate a little bit. So just to start, I'm using Blender 4.1.1, and I'm using the last stable release version of Blender BIM, which is 240402, the 2nd of April 2024, right? Which is about 20 days ago. There are more recent versions. Let's say you need to use this version or something newer. If you use something older, it might look a bit different. It might not work in the same way. All right. So also part of this preamble, just make sure you have your snaps turned on, because I'm going to be snapping throughout this whole process. And then I'd recommend that you turn on shadow and cavity. It just helps with visualization inside of Blender, and lets you see things when things are flat a little bit better. And then the one key add-on you need to have installed besides Blender BIM itself is the DXF importer exporter, right? So this comes default with Blender. Without it, you're not going to be able to import the DXF that you just saved, essentially. So there's two add-ons. One is export AutoCAD DXF, and the other one is import AutoCAD DXF, right? But it's any DXF. It doesn't have to come from AutoCAD, essentially. These come default with Blender, so you don't have to go find them. You just type in DXF into your add-ons panel, and it will show up. All right, so I'm going to create a new folder, new collection. I'm just going to call this DXF. And the first thing I'm going to do is actually save a Blender file with the DXF inside of it, because you can't currently save the DXF to a IFC file, or you can, but it makes the IFC quite heavy, and it's quite a long process. It's simpler to just have it as a reference inside of a Blender file. So we're going to import that DXF folder, that DXF file. So we go File, Import, AutoCAD DXF, and I'm just going to go to where my DXF is stored. So here's my DXF. I'm just going to click import. I'm not going to change any of the settings. And you can see that it's imported that DXF, right? So what we saw here, we've got our annotations, we've got our lines, it's all in there. The one thing it doesn't pull in is the hatches. And I'm not certain about that. Hopefully that can change in the future. I'm sure it will. But for now, we don't need those, essentially.
Hey,
So we've
Lloyd.
got everything we need.
So,
How's it,
sorry
Petru?
for jumping in. A quick
No
question.
stress.
You
Yes, go for it.
mentioned the snaps. Is there a
Yes.
way to turn the snaps for always, or you need to do that every time you launch Blender?
No, there is a way to turn it to have it on always. So essentially, you would just need to turn on the snaps,
Yeah.
and then come to File, Defaults, and
Oh,
say
yeah.
Save
You
Startup
need to
File.
save it as defaults. Okay. Okay.
Yes, yeah. So
Right.
that's if you change anything, including the visibility settings in the viewport here,
Mm-hmm.
I would say set it all up so that it's how you want it to be, and then
Yeah.
save it as a default file.
Okay.
But yes, that's
Thank you.
besides the point. I just go through it because people get frustrated if there's no snapping, which I understand. All right, so we've imported our DXF essentially, and it's all included here. I'm going to just take this. I'm going to press A to select everything. Also, just a little FYI, everything I'm doing can be recorded here in the bottom left. So if you want to follow along, so I press A, and I'm just going to drag this into the DXF folder. This is just so that I can turn it off and on if I want to, essentially. And then I've got my, you can see we're in the 3D viewport, and I'm just going to go to the plan view again. So I've got my 3D cursor here, and I'm going to actually add a little plane, Shift A, mesh plane, and move it so it aligns with the origin point. So GY, GX, minus 1000. I'm using millimeters as my unit. So you can see on the left here, metric millimeters, square and cube meters, essentially. If you're using imperial or if you're using meters, just know if I type 1000, it means 1 meter, essentially. And then I'm just going to grab all those curves here, which came in through the DXF, and I'm going to move it to align this corner. So I'm just going to press G, which is grab. I'm going to press B, to select a base point. So this allows me to snap and then snap it to that origin center. This just helps me get a clean file. It just works better with my brain. And then I'm going to delete this reference. So this is here, and it's all set up how I want it to be. So I just want to save this as a Blender file. So not an IFC file yet. This is my reference Blender file, so I don't have to keep importing the DXF. And it's in a position that I want it to be. So I'm just going to say File, and we're just going to go down here to Save. And we can see it's saved. CAD to BIM Blender file, .blend, right? So for you, because I'm saving on top of an older file, it's saved automatically. But for you, you'll have a pop-up where it'll just say, where do you want to save this? And you can choose a location. The next thing you want to do is open another blend file so that you have this open. And from here, we're going to create our IFC file, essentially. So on the left-hand side here, if we look at the top, we're in the BIM landscape layout, essentially, which is the default one if you have Blender BIM installed. And again, you need to have Blender BIM installed to do this, which is a free add-on for Blender, which is also free and open source. So just make sure you have Blender BIM installed and make sure you have a version that's either 24.04.02 or newer, essentially. Otherwise, it's probably going to look a little bit different.
Okay,
so we've
Lloyd,
got...
Sorry,
Yeah?
sorry for jumping again.
Go for it,
but I have to ask you this. But yes, just to understand easier. So you need to have a version all after 2nd of April. It's because each revision, each new release has the date in it. We have a question here, and let's just clarify that because you mentioned now this. If you just save to IFC with a DFX, don't get saved, or
it doesn't get saved. Yeah,
no,
it won't get saved. So you would need to classify the DXF as an IFC class for it to be
first.
saved.
Yeah.
And yes, and even then, each layer inside of your DXF would need to be individually classified. So it's a manual process at the moment.
Yeah. But
right
instead,
now, if you wanted to do it and you imported a DWG or DXF, yeah?
Yeah, and you save it as a blend file, right? That is something you can do.
Yes, that's why I saved it as a blend file, because it's a lot faster and I don't actually need all of this information. So all of this on the side, I don't need, essentially. I only need the reference here, because what I'm going to do is replace this with a BIM. I'm going to basically draw this natively in Blender BIM instead of hold the DXF information, because the DXF information is actually heavier inside of an IFC than a 3D model is, which we'll see. I'll show you how to convert it into an IFC annotation so it can be saved, but that'll be a little bit further down the line, probably in 30 minutes or so, essentially. But yes, so I would recommend saving this as a Blender file so that it doesn't have to sit inside of the IFC file, which we've yet to create, just so that it's a lot simpler, it's a lot faster, and it's a less manual process, essentially. So you can only pull the things that you need to pull, basically. Does that clear it up, Petru? Is there any other questions?
Yeah, no, so far only that one. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, brilliant, awesome. All right, so here we're going to create our IFC file. I'm going to be using IFC4. I'd recommend that if you're going to do any sort of native IFC modeling. I'm going to be using metric, millimeters, square, and cube meters. And then for the templates, I would say you need to start with the IFC4 demo template. So this will have everything we need in it already. And we don't have to create any sort of new IFC types, although we are going to create one just as a point of reference. So these are the settings. It's inside of the scene properties and then here in project overview. And then we're just going to say create project. So I'm going to click that. So it's created our project on the left-hand side. So here we can see our project layout, right? Where it goes project, site, building, story, and there's an empty to represent each. Then we've got our views and we've got our types, which we can make visible for a second and just hide them again because we don't need to see them. So I'm just going to collapse that to clean up our outline over here. And what we're going to do is we're going to copy our DXF into this file. So it's not going to be saved with IFC, but it's going to be temporarily stored inside of this Blender session, essentially. So I'm going to go back to my old Blender file, which I've saved. I'm going to copy everything here. I can press A, or I can just select everything I want. I'm going to say Control C. We're going to go into the IFC file. I'm going to go here to collection so that it's not confusing. I'm going to go into plan view, which is 7 on your number pad, and press V. And it will load it in the same position in this IFC file as it was in the Blender file, essentially. All right, so I'm just going to collapse that so it stays separately. And then from here, we're going to use this as a point of reference to build out our native IFC Blender BIM model. So there are different ways to do this, of course, but I find this is the most straightforward approach at the moment. And it is the most efficient approach so that you don't end up with huge files with too much information and old legacy bits of information that you don't actually need. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by measuring all of the different key types inside of the DWG. So we're going to start with what I've written over here inside of the DWG. We're going to measure the type sizes, and then we're going to do the load-bearing walls, the dividing walls, the doors and windows, and then the columns, essentially. It's a very simple plan I've got here, essentially. So this is not going to take too long, but I think it's a pretty good example of just going through the basics. So I'm just going to use Blender's default measure tool over here, and I'm going to start measuring these external walls. So I'm going to snap there, press Y. Okay, that's 200. And then I'm going to measure an internal wall, press X, that's 100. Then we have a door here, press Y, that's about 1 meter. And then we have a window, press Y, that's 900. We've got a meter window on this side, that's 900. And then we've got a little door here, press Y, that's a sliding door. It's 600. It's pretty tight, but that's the size it is. And then the last thing here is a square hollow section, a rectangular hollow section here, which we're just going to measure very neatly. So I'm just going to snap there and press X. And then it's attached there. I can see it's 75. Snap here, press Y, and attach there, and it's 150. All right. So we've got our general type sizes. So these are the IFC types that we're going to want to create or use by default inside of Blender BIM. So we're going to start with the load-bearing walls. So those tend to be the external walls. So I'm going to click on the wall tool, and I'm going to say, okay, cool, I've got a 200 wall. So I see there's my 200. Make sure I'm on the wall tool. Make sure I've selected the correct collection to put it into. And then I'm going to snap to the point. So I'm snapping. You can see what I'm doing here. I'm pressing Shift, and I'm right-clicking, and it changes the position of the 3D cursor. So that's where I can add the item, right? So I've selected my wall, and at the top here, I've selected wall 200. I can either click Add, or I can use the hotkey Shift A. So I'm going to say Shift A, and then you can see in the outliner, it's added the wall. And here's the wall as well. And then I'm going to snap to this corner here and say Shift E, which is extend. You can also just click extend. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here, Shift A, Shift E, Shift A, Shift E. This is basically, we're building this from scratch. And then instead of creating a new one there, I'm just going to press Shift D, which will duplicate this wall, and press X, and then snap it to the edge there. And then I can see there's a wall here, but this is a low wall. And I know this because if I look at my DXF, it doesn't have a hatch. But again, this would just have to come from your knowledge of the of the DXF or the DWG that we bring in. So I'm going to also add a wall here, but I'm going to change the default height to 1500. And I'm going to say Shift A, and then Shift R, and then snap it there. So if I go to 3D, you can see we've just got the basic shape of the whole environment. So I'm going to go back to my plan view, and we're going to finish this off. I'm going to add my internal wall here. So we've done our load-bearing walls. Now let's do our dividing walls, our non-structural walls, our internal walls, whichever term you'd like to refer to them as. Press Shift A. I'm going to press Shift R. And then I'm going to bring it down, GY, snap it there. And then I'm just going to hide that wall so I can select a snapping point. Select this, Shift E, and then snap there, Shift A. And then I can adjust this length over here. So essentially at this point, we're just manually modeling these elements. So we've got our walls in. We've got our load-bearing walls. We've got our non-load-bearing walls. And now we want to do our doors and windows. But an issue here is now we're in plan view, but we can't see the windows anymore. We can see the door, but we can't really see the full length of the door. So what we want to do is actually add a plan, and that'll allow us to see the DXF through the walls. So to do that, we actually need to save this IFC. So here we're going to say File, Save IFC Project. So I'm just going to say Save IFC Project. And I'm going to go to here, and I'm going to make, so you can choose wherever you want to put this, but I've got a little working file, and I'm just going to call this CAD to BIM live, and I'm going to say Save IFC. So it's been saved, and now I can go to my Drawings and Documents tab over here, and we're going to add the plan view to this. So I'm going to collapse all this, go to Drawings, click on this little down arrow, select Plan, and then select My Story. And then we're going to click plus to add a drawing. So there are three things that immediately happen. The one is there's a new camera in the actual 3D viewport. The other one is in the outliner. You can see it says it added a view, My Story Plan, which in South Africa we would just call the ground floor plan. And then also in this drawings dropdown, there's a thing called My Story Plan as well. So we just need to select that, and we just click on this little activate drawing button. And then it loads that drawing. So if we zoom in here, we can now see, we can see the DXF through the walls as part of the cut plan, because it's actually cutting the geometry instead of just seeing it from above. But this camera by default comes in at 50 by 50 meters, and that's not really the size I want. So I'm going to go with 8 meters with a height of 6 meters. And then I'm going to disable my snaps temporarily just to center it, and then turn them back on. And then just to check that this worked, I'm going to activate the drawing again, and I'm going to click Create Drawing. Apologies, this is just me making sure everything works. So you can see here we've got a drawing, we've got our cut pattern, and we've got our walls that are not quite the right height. So I can see now that I've accidentally made these walls too low. So I'm just going to select them and change their height to 3 meters. And I'm also going to change the drawing scale to 1 to 50, just so we have something a little bit nicer to look at. I'm going to click Activate, and I'm going to say Print. And now we have essentially a floor plan with a low wall on the side there. Right. So from there, we want to do these doors and windows. And we can just check the sizes by clicking on the measure tool. Okay, this is about 1,000. 1,010, I'm just going to make it a meter. And then this one is 900. So I'm going to go to the door tool, create door, door type 1. I'm going to select this wall, not the DXF, but the wall itself. So it's green. And then I'm going to snap to that point. Make sure I've got the door tool selected. I've got the door type selected and the wall selected. And then press Shift A or just click Add. Shift A. And we can see the door's been added. I can tell just from the 2D that it's not in the right direction. So I'm going to flip this. So you can see there's a flip button. It's also Shift F as a hotkey. And then I'm going to bring it to the side. So I'm going to press GX and snap it there. And then this is also not in the right position. So I'm going to say GY and snap it there. And then just to refresh the opening, I'm going to press Shift G, which is just going to change the opening to match the size of the door. And then if I activate this drawing, it will turn it into a 2D instead of a 3D representation. And then the next one we need to do is this sliding door, which we know is 600. So if I check my measurements, 600, I'm going to go to my doors, and then I'm going to click on this little waffle grid icon, the launch type manager, and I'm going to create a new door type. So I'm actually going to duplicate this existing one because it kind of has everything set up. So I've got a second one, and then I'm going to edit the description of this. So here it's going to be called door type 02. I'm going to say it's 600, and I'm going to call this sliding. So there we have door type 2, 600 slide. We've selected the door tool. We've got the wall selected, and I'm just going to press Shift A. Ooh. And we've just got a bit of an error here. Not quite certain what we've done incorrectly, but this shouldn't really take too much of a problem. So I'm just going to refresh this. I'm not certain what changed 2 seconds ago, but I'm just going to refresh this quickly, and we're just going to go and open that IFC file that we saved.
And now, Lloyd, when we reopen
Yeah.
that IFC file that you saved, that will not
Yeah.
have the collection anymore, right?
The
The
Yes, it
collection
won't.
with the DXF.
Yes, the DXF. So I've just opened it now. You can see the DXF is gone
Yeah.
essentially. So there's no collection there.
Yeah, because it
Yeah.
was not classified. Okay.
Yes.
We have a few questions. Let's take this on right now because
Go
they
for it.
make sense in this context before you go any further.
Go for it.
So let's see. Can we extract information of elements from Blender? This is a bit not very clear question, but yeah, try
I
to
think
take
what
a
they're
note of it.
asking is, can you take the BIM information out of Blender BIM, which is the quantities and the attributes and that kind of thing? You can. We're not going to go into it today. Today is just about taking a CAD file and turning it into a BIM model. But there are other workshops where people look at validating that model, taking information out of it. It's just a bit more complicated. It takes a bit longer, but you can definitely pull this information out. You can take out quantities, floor areas, wall areas, heights, all of that.
Problem is
That's the
that,
whole
yeah,
beauty.
I don't
Yeah.
know if Igio he wrote just Blender. That was a bit confusing because I'm not sure if he
So
thinks
yeah.
something
So
else.
we just need to make sure there's a distinction between Blender and Blender BIM, right?
Mm-hmm.
So obviously Blender BIM is the BIM add-on for Blender. So Blender is just, it's not just, but it is a 3D modeling and animation tool, essentially. But Blender BIM takes that dumb information, that dumb model, and turns it into a smart model. And it attaches information like thermal performance, quantities, attributes, like if what the material of the door is, and when it's attached inside of Blender BIM, you can take that information out. But inside of Blender, that information, some of that information is there. Like we could probably get the area of this wall, but we wouldn't be able to get the volume out of it without an additional add-on. So Blender BIM does all of that in one go, essentially. So I think that is the answer to that question.
Okay.
But we're not really going to cover it today. Yeah.
Yeah. Another one. How can I know if side is external? Which side is external of the wall?
Oh, at the moment, it's not visually separated, but you can see how Blender works and also how IFC works is there's an origin to the object. So when I select the wall itself, there is a little orange dot, essentially. It's probably too small to see in the screen share. But it's essentially where these axes are coming from, where this circle is highlighted. And that represents either the internal or the external side of the wall. I can't tell you right now which one it represents, but you can flip it and decide which side it is. So I've got my wall. So if we flip this, right, I've got the wall tool selected and I press Shift F. You can see it changed the side that the origin is on, essentially. I do believe that the side the origin on is by default set as the external wall, but you can also change that around and adjust it inside of Blender BIM. And that's really quite detailed. And again, not really inside of the scope of today, but it is there, it is stored information, and there's a distinction between the two, essentially. Yeah.
Okay. One more.
Go for it.
Let's see. Could you also use the X-ray view from the Blender shader to see the DXF through the walls?
You could, yes, absolutely. But I found this is just the most efficient way to do it. So if you click on X-ray, this is what they're talking about. You can see through the walls like this. So if you prefer to model in 3D, this is definitely more useful. But I'm just showcasing one way to do it. And it's definitely not, I would say at the moment, it's probably the most efficient way, but it definitely isn't the only way to do it. So if you prefer modeling in 3D from this, I find when you're pulling in a DXF, it's a little bit easier in plan view. Then it makes more sense to just have the plan already set up so that you can run it through. But this is definitely an option. And if you find this works better for you, I'd say go for it. Don't let me hold you back, essentially.
Okay, another one. Can we
Yeah,
cut a cross section? What about a section box in the model? Through the model?
so there isn't a section box tool in Blender BIM, but there is a a section plane tool. So there's the clipping plane. Let me just hope this works perfectly. So Shift A, and just give me 1 second. I think my computer is just a bit
But
old.
I'm not
I'm
sure,
using it.
Lloyd. Yeah, this is the
Yeah,
visual stuff. I'm not sure if they refer to just visually or to take a section like the drawing, because there are these two things. Yeah, you can do that
yeah,
with that tool that you are
yes.
using right now to take a section. Yeah, you can do that.
Yeah. So yes, sorry, that's what I was getting to. But
Mhm.
this is for like a visualization of the 3D model. I'm actually going to turn off the X-ray because I don't actually like it. But yes, so this is for taking a quick visualization, but this isn't actually a section drawing. This is just for seeing, cutting the model,
To
which
visualize.
is kind of, yeah, it's for visualization, which is similar to how I would use the section box in Revit, for instance. But if you wanted to create a section drawing, you would have to come here to drawings and then select a section and choose a direction, which we are going to show by the end of the thing. I think, Petru, if I can just do, are there any more questions for this?
Where is the section plane option?
So at the moment, it's inside of the Explore tool, and then the hotkey is Shift C.
Hey, Dion,
And
don't you have?
it's quite.
Oh my God. Dion, go to sleep, man. Dion is here. He's writing comments.
Dion, isn't it 2 a.m. where you are?
Hey, by the
But yeah,
way.
the section tool is very nice for um, checking out random directions. It's very useful. But yes,
Mhm.
you can use it for any direction. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, I don't think we have any other question right now. Yes, going to sleep. Yeah, go sleep tight, man. Sleep tight. No, it's only half past 11, he says. But guys, come
Uh,
on. We peaked at 115. Let's get 150. Come on, press like on this live stream and repost it. Come on, guys. I'm sure not everyone did it. You can do that. You are our friend, right? Come on, go ahead, Lloyd.
Excellent. Okay, cool. I'm gonna just get rid of that. All right, and then I think I accidentally moved this, but yes, I press Shift. I was explaining the flipping. So you can flip this as long as you have the wall tool, the correct tool selected. You press Shift F, and then this is pretty much in the wrong position, so I've just put it back. So essentially, I've still got my DXF here in a Blender file. So because I loaded that IFC again, my DXF disappeared. And I'm just going to show, like, during this process, how you would save the DXF inside of the IFC. It is a tedious process. So it's not my, it's not the my recommended way to do it. So I'm just going to press, I'm going to copy this, Control C, and then copy it again into the IFC file, Control V. And you can see everything is in the correct position. So we had an error with our plan. So I'm just going to create the plan again and my story, select it, activate it, and then go to our active drawing and change this to 8 meters. And this is to 6 meters. This is just my preference. Then we're just going to bring it aligned roughly there and turn our snaps back on. And we're just going to check it works, activate, and print the drawing. And there we go. Okay, brilliant. So that's where we are. I'm going to make it 1 to 50. Excellent. Okay, cool. So the first thing we're going to do is add this drawing in. The other thing that's going to disappear is these measure marks because they're inside of Blender, not Blender BIM. So the three things we needed to measure were these doors, and then the windows were the same. They were both 900. Right, so we got those measures in again. I'm going to click the door tool and click on door type 1. And then I'm just going to select this and press Shift A. So we've got our door there. And I'm just going to line it with our existing doors here. So I'm press GY and say Shift G. All right, and I'm just going to put in the rest of the doors and the windows, and then we're going to check it works in the 2D. So we've got this other door, the sliding door. So I'm going to do the same thing I was demonstrating. I'm going to go to the launch type manager, which is this little waffle grid here, launch type manager. Then here it'll have the door type automatically selected. I'm just going to say duplicate because it's the fastest way to do it. And we're going to rename this duplicated version, door type 02. This is just my process at the moment. It probably will change in the future, but that's the fastest way to create a new kind of door. And then select the wall, make sure you've got door type 2 selected, press Shift A, and there we've got it. So at the moment, it's exactly the same as door type 1, but we're going to adjust it. So I'm going to adjust this. I'm going to press GY. I'm going to say Shift G to adjust the position. And then I'm going to come to the Geometry and Materials tab, collapse all of this, go to Parametric Geometry, and go to the Door modifier. So we need to add a modifier to change this into a sliding door. So this can be done by default inside of Blender BIM without any additional modeling. So click Add Door Modifier, and you can see it's adjusted it slightly. And I'm going to click on this little pencil tool to adjust the settings of the door modifier. There's a lot to change here, but we don't need to do most of it. I'm just going to change the width to 600. And then I'm going to change the type to sliding to the left, I think, and say finish. And now I'm going to activate the drawing. So go here and say activate drawing. There we can see our door's the wrong way there, and also over here. So I'm going to press flip for this one. So flip, and then the position is incorrect. So I'm going to press G and then B to snap to the position I wanted to snap to. So we can go there, G, B, Y, snap there, and we can press Shift G, and it will just update the opening. And then the same thing for this one. I'm going to press Shift F and say GX, and just bring it into the position GY, GX that I wanted to. So it's there at the moment. So we can check our doors. I'm going to activate again and just say print. And you can see there is our one door, and there's our sliding door, essentially. All right, and then we just need to put in our windows.
Lloyd.
And I'm just going to say, Petru, could you give me 1 second, and then we can
Sure.
answer some more questions. Yeah, just so I can get through the windows, and then we can go through, because I planned a bunch of stuff, and I'm not 10 minutes in. Yeah. So window type 1, I'm going to press Shift A. There's the window type. Thankfully, it's exactly the same size. Press Shift G, bring it to the end here. And then again, snap it to that position, Shift A. It's in the correct position. So I'm just going to say activate and then print. And then I'm just going to save the IFC. All right, Petru, what questions do we have?
You should not worry if you don't manage to go through everything. It's just a live stream, like it's not a class, it's not a master class or workshop. So yeah, it's a proof of concept for anyone interested to see what the possibilities are. But actually, I got a question for the audience, not for you. And I'm really curious about this because personally, I'm not interested in this workflow, but I'm really curious. You mentioned that you almost do this in all your projects. I'm curious if anyone else out there who actually uses this workflow, who starts from some sketches or some drawings, and they need to convert to Blender BIM, to a model, and on top of that, another question would be that if that's the case, would you be interested to see more of these kind of videos? That would help us a lot to make more and better catered content for you. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I appreciate your feedback.
Petru, can I ask you, do you never get CAD files when you guys do a new building?
Not so much.
Really? No CAD files. You guys are completely 3D in that side.
The goal is to be model based. So the focus is to be like that, yes. There are still some CAD files here and there, but not to be used like for me as a reference for something else to model anything, right? So yeah, but the aim is to build model based, and it becomes the norm in Norway. But there are still some things that can be improved, of course.
Yeah, I mean, just for me, right, using this process, the reason I don't want to keep the DXF inside of the IFC file. I want to move completely onto the IFC. So even though we've been working in 2D, we essentially have a 3D model at this point. So we can adjust from here. It doesn't have to be attached to this. But often when I'm dealing with CAD files, it's either an older project And honestly, anything older than 2 years ago, people are still using CAD files. And yeah, often I have to coordinate with people who are working in CAD as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's a very specific my side of the world situation, but I think there are other people
No, it's
who are in a
not
similar
only.
situation,
I'm
especially if you're
I'm,
working
I'm
in
sure.
the
No, man,
developing
no.
world.
I think
Yeah.
it's valid everywhere in the world. It's still valid. Like here, there are also in Norway, there are definitely clients who are still requiring this. I'm talking about mostly about the largest clients requiring model-based deliveries and so on. But there are still drawings are still used here as well. But
Okay, yeah.
especially all over the world, people are still using CAD drawings. So yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm just using the plan here as a reference. So we don't actually have to make a 2D plan at the end of this. This is just, I know this is, a lot of people like to work in plan, as do I. But if you're comfortable working completely in 3D, you can do this whole process in 3D without the plan. And like that other commenter recommended, you can just use the X-ray function and you can see the CAD through it, essentially. But yes, I'm just going to continue with this then. And there is just one thing I want to show before we wrap up, um, which is converting this DXF into an IFC annotation, which is actually how you would store it inside of the IFC file, which does require 2D information. It does require a CAD, a view to store it in, and it is a little bit tedious, essentially. So basically, we've modeled in the windows and doors, and we've modeled in the walls all the way around. And there is also a rectangular hollow section here, which we had at 75 by 150. Yeah. So this CAD file comes from an IFC. So fortunately, it lines up with the existing specs. So I know it's C3, and I'm just going to add this as a column. So I'm using the column tool, and I'm going to add it there just so that I can complete the space here, G, B, X, and just line it up with the correct space. All right, and then in 3D, just going to snap it. We're going to check the 3D model. We've got our half wall, we've got a column, we've got our value. All right, so one of the last things, just so that, because there's a lot of questions and I'd like to answer them rather than just go through the modeling process. But to convert, for instance, contours, which is a lot of 2D information that doesn't get represented well in 3D. So it makes more sense to store it as 2D information. The contours, I find project after project, especially when you're dealing with large sites. So I've got my fictional contours here. And essentially, I want to convert this into an IFC annotation. So in my column, I've accidentally put into the wrong space. I'm just going to spatially contain it so that it's correct with the IFC. Alrighty. So we're going to select these contours, so these 2D lines, and we're going to convert them into IFC annotations. So we would have to go to this object information panel here, and then go and select IFC element, or sorry, IFC annotation. And then you can see the class is immediately IFC annotation. That's the only option. And then because we're doing it in a plan view, we're going to choose plan annotation plan view. And I'm going to assign that class. This is step one. So it's added it to the end there. From there, we're going to load the IFC groups inside of the Blender BIM file. So at the moment, this is a tedious process, but it's completely possible. So we're going to go to our project overview. We're going to come down to grouping and filtering. And we're just going to click on groups, and we're just going to click this little button that will load whatever groups are in this current project. So at the moment, it's just the My Story plan, which is just the ground floor plan. Then from there, we're going to actually select the annotation object again. We're going to go back to our object metadata, our object information, and we're going to select the IFC group that needs to be assigned to. So here we actually go to MISC, and then we go to groups, and then you can see it's got one group selected there. All we need to do is click add assign group. So once we click that, it'll pop up at the bottom. It says My Story Plan. It's assigned, essentially. Alrighty. And then from here, I normally just drag it in because these aren't really spatially contained. So I'll drag it into the annotation view here. So it's dragged in, but that's not doing it just yet. We also need to adjust the object type and the attribute as well. So at the moment, it's a curve. So you can see this little shape here is a curve. It needs to be a mesh to be appropriately applied, essentially. So I'm going to go to object, and this, I might have done this in the wrong order, but we're going to say convert to mesh. So just, it needs to be a mesh for it to work properly as a 2D annotation. So I'm going to click mesh, it's converted, and then we're going to come to attributes, and we're going to edit this, and we're just going to call the lines this object type. So this will give it its actual kind of class, line type. And I'm just going to call this contours. And then I'm going to go back here, and I'm just going to say activate drawing. So you can see now the contours have turned white, and that is our 5-step process for assigning a single DXF layer as an IFC type. And at the moment, if I say activate and I say create drawing, it's just a solid line. So even to add that additional information is another layer that you need to do inside of Blender BIM. So I'm just going to, again, match properties, kind of. I'm going to use the annotation tool and create a dashed line for me to plagiarize from. So line dashed using the annotation tool. I'm going to press add, and then I'm going to click on my contour here. So you can see there it's selected. We're going to go back to our object information. Don't need any of this. We're going to go to type. You see there's no relating type. And we're just going to use our little eyedropper to select that dashed line. And it's created, turned it into a dash type. And then we just need to activate the drawing and print it. And it did not work. That's very funny because I did this literally 10 seconds ago as a check. Alrighty. Well, that's very funny. But you can adjust the line type in a different way, but I'm not going to go through it right now. But essentially, that's how you classify a DXF, and this will be saved with the IFC file. So if I save this, so I say File, Save, and I say File, let's say, I'm just going to say New General, just so that we're closing this, and we're going to open the IFC file. And we're just going to go to our live file. So you can see the 3D model has loaded. And to retrieve the DXF information, the 2D information, we need to activate the drawing. And it stored the contour lines there. So if I wanted to take this DXF file and convert it into and save it with the IFC, either I would do this one at a time per layer, essentially. So I would use the contour layer, I would do the wall layer, I would do the window layer, etc., etc. There's only 3 in here because I made this file. But often in a DXF or DWG, there's hundreds of layers here. So this is quite a long process. Or you would save all of these as a single DXF and then save that as a IFC annotation type on a single layer. But the problem with that is it gets hard to distinguish the lines. You lose kind of the distinction between the different layers, and then it kind of loses its purpose. So this is why I'd recommend saving a Blender file with the DXF in it in the correct position, and then only putting across the 2D line information that you need inside of the Blender BIM file. All right, Petru, are there any questions? I'll show a section, and then we can,
okay,
if there's any questions, we can go for
those
ones.
So this is actually a great moment to ask people. So if you have any questions, please leave it there because it will take 2 or 3 or 5 minutes to see them. It's a bit of delay. Please leave your questions right now. This is your chance, and we are going to cover it afterwards. Meanwhile, Lloyd, we can have a quick look at, I got some things, but not, some comments, not necessarily questions. So let's see. When I asked people what they are using this, so I take IFC and then I use Blender BIM for 5D BIM. Okay, that's okay. Modeling, existing IFCs would be,
Okay.
I think this as an idea, LOI and LOG, level of information and level of geometry. Okay,
Yes.
then let's say the workflow of capture existing design needs the massing and modeling to harvest the objects. That's why scan to BIM is attractive. Pierre is saying this, but I don't understand if this is something he would like to see how to do, or what do you think about this, Lloyd?
I think he's asking, he's saying he'd prefer a scan to BIM process. I think in a lot of cases, just if you have the DXF file or the PDF or any sort of reference already available and you know it's trustworthy, this kind of tends to be faster on smaller projects and less time consuming. But we can definitely look at scan to BIM. It's a little bit more complicated, but you can store, although I can't get into it now, you can store point clouds with the IFC file as well. So that is a whole different process from the scan to BIM process. But this is more of a CAD to BIM. You kind of have information, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Leonardo says that I do use this workflow either from CAD or from sketches. I use Wacom to sketch on Inkscape. Sometimes I also use square paper drawings as a reference and model directly from scratch.
There we go.
Prashant Patel says that I have replaced Navisworks with Blender BIM. Ah, that's crazy.
Wow.
Congratulations, man. I'm also using it to a very intense degree, but not replaced completely. I want to use energy analysis ladybug tool, which is not functioning right now. That's very good. Pierre says that the 2D is part of the design documents. The failure is that the 2D is not properly prepared and layered. Symbols are not consistent and standards too. Lloyd, I make comparisons with the BIMX tool where the 2D overlay and alignment is very attractive, bringing to content into the correct view, giving overlay of the data, dims, and nodes.
I haven't used the BIMX tool, I think, but this whole interface and the visualization of these things is like constantly being worked on. I would say the difference between Blender BIM and everything else is that Blender BIM really focuses on trying to be as IFC compliant as possible, whereas nearly every other tool kind of takes some sort of shortcut or incorrect interpretation of that thing. And Petru, you know this, like it's a native IFC editor, so there's no what you have in there is what you get essentially, which in some cases is a bit clunky, like this how you classify a DXF as an IFC annotation. If this could be a one-step process, that would make things a lot easier. But that's currently, I mean, it's just a matter of user interface. Over time, this will definitely get simpler. Like Blender BIM is changing all the time.
Yeah.
For sure.
Pierre says something else about that, so let me say this, read this also. Lloyd, the site topo data should be a separate location file, which linked allows the coordination of a single source always. Only the need to change, update one file. The site model file is the way the documents should be assembled, with one content shared and used in many ways. Then Blender BIM starts working.
Absolutely. And if you have a separate, if you have an actual surveyor's CAD file with height information and all of that, because this is just fake 2D for as a showcase, that would be a simpler way. But even inside of that, right, it would be it would be quite complicated to bring that information in without saving it separately. Because if you wanted it to be stored inside of the IFC annotation, you're looking at contours as one example. You're looking at boundary elements, pegs, trees, foliage, like water streams, stormwater. There's all these layers. It's still quite a slow process.
There is also another challenge with that, Lloyd. Like using IFC annotation, for you it works well because you use only Blender BIM for everything, for visualization, for modeling, for everything. But IFC annotation, let's not forget something. It's not supported by many IFC viewers. So that you actually you cannot see that data in Solibri or other tools.
So what I would do separately to this is actually model the So I've kind of drawn this as half-meter increments. I would actually model the 3D terrain as well, and then store that with the IFC. But that's what I'm saying. It just doesn't represent itself properly when you cut the terrain at different levels. I don't know. It's something to do with triangulation or something. It's always different from the contours that are provided. And I found that in Revit, in ArchiCAD, in every program I've ever used. So this is just to store the correct reference information, because like this contour being at that point, at that corner, is probably not going to be the case once I make the 3D terrain and then loft the shape, essentially, unless it's manually modeled, which is not necessarily how you want to do it. But yes, Petru, I would store an actual model of a 3D space with the actual heights in addition to the 2D information, but use the 2D information as a reference so that I don't have to keep loading it in, and so that it represents itself properly in the 2D space.
So you
But
would
you are right.
separate, you would separate the 2D stuff from 3D.
I would separate just this element, and I bet you there are other places where, like symbols, something like that, where you want that information to be in the same place.
Okay.
And when you go into 3D, it will move it because that's not the most logical location for it to exist. So
Okay.
yeah, so this is just an example of that where you would want to store it. Like I said, most of the time, you don't want to bring all of that DXF information into your IFC. You just want to use it as a reference when you're modeling. Yeah. So I would avoid storing that information as much as possible. But contours is one where I cannot get away because I don't get the right contours, essentially. And Blender BIM currently doesn't deal with contours very well. Yeah, but that's only because I'm using it as my full workflow tool. If you are modeling or doing 2D drafting in a different program, it's not an issue. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else you want to show, or should we?
I think somebody just wanted to see a section.
Okay.
So we can just draw one quickly here. So I've just
Yeah,
selected a
do
point.
that. And in the meantime, guys, if you have any other questions, please leave it there because now it's your last chance. After that, we are wrapping up. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. So section north, you press plus. Then you go to this little section view. You say activate. You can see it's been added to our outliner over here. North section. And then the size is always 50 by 50 by default. So I'm just going to go into edit mode here and just snap these points here. And then I'm going to adjust this again. The width will be 8. And the height, I did something there, will be 6. Obviously, we haven't modeled the roof, but it would be quite straightforward. And then I just want to adjust the size to 150 and just move this out a little bit. So you can see here it's cutting through the door, the window, our half wall, and all that. So I can say activate and create drawing. And then we have a section. There's my sliding door, there's my window. It doesn't have a sill at the moment, but that's it. And we don't have a floor or roof at the moment, but we haven't modeled that. So that's how you would create a section if you wanted to store 2D information as a reference in the section. This is how you would do it as well, essentially. But yeah, I agree with you, Petru. Most of the time you want the 2D information to be tied to whatever the 3D model is. But yeah, so that's just one example of where you would not want it. And then you can see there's a preview here. Essentially, it shows you the outlines of what you're cutting through. And you can adjust this. The camera is just a 3D object as well. So you can adjust your section to be wherever you want it to be as well. It's a very versatile tool. All right. Are there any final questions, Petru? Or
Yes.
is this...
Yes.
Okay.
I see here thrown around energy analysis, but I don't know if did you do any work with the energy analysis in Blender BIM?
I also tried to use Ladybug when Dion initially did it, but the last version for the last year or so, year and a half or so, doesn't work that well. There is a funding campaign to update Ladybug to work with the latest version of Blender BIM. So I don't have the link to that right now, but if that is what you're interested in, go for it, go do it. I do know that there are some people using it for energy analysis currently. but they're using external tools like openFOAM, I think, and those kinds of things. Building their model inside of Blender BIM or cleaning it up inside of Blender BIM and then exporting it to external tools for energy analysis. But beyond that, it's not something I do in day to day. My energy analysis, the energy analysis in South Africa is pretty rudimentary, but it's definitely something I want to get to as part of this process. Essentially, yeah, that's where we are
Okay.
at the moment.
Okay. A very interesting question actually right now. Lloyd, in your workflow,
Yes.
how do you do for you to not lose your work? Save versions of your work. I have lost some work and it's frustrating.
It is very frustrating. So there's two things you can do, and this is a little bit my fault because I haven't made a video about it. The one is IFC Git. So if you have a constant internet connection and a constant electricity supply, IFC Git is probably the thing you want to use, and it will automatically back up your IFC model as you make it. It is insanely amazing. It is the future. It is better than anything else out there. And it'll back up literally every single change you made on the IFC file. And because the IFC file is so small, you won't even notice it happening in the background. So that is the approach I would take if you have a constant internet connection and a constant electricity connection. And I say this because I do not have both of those things. So the alternative, which is quite an old school way of doing it, is you just save two versions of the file every time you save it, so that if you corrupt the version you're working on, you can go back to the other one. I find Blender BIM doesn't crash or corrupt too often, although today was a terrible example of that. But I would say you save two versions and you save in increments of 1 hour or 30 minutes essentially, and you should be good. But IFC Git will save every 30 seconds, however much you want to do it, and it is the preferred way to do it if you have internet and electricity. Yeah, so that's the solution. It's a solved problem unless you have power outages.
Okay. Another good question. Roof modeling is nothing but straightforward from Ivo. I struggled with
Yes.
it many days and in the end I gave up.
Oh, okay. In Blender BIM, it's pretty straightforward. So there's two things. Okay, so if I want to do a flat roof, I would normally use a slab actually
We don't
instead of a
see
roof tool.
your
And then,
screen anymore. I stopped
ah,
it for you.
okay, my bad. Give me a second.
No, you know, it's not your
Um,
bad. I stopped it to have your face
no,
on
I didn't
camera.
even notice. I didn't even notice. Okay,
Not a flat roof.
I'm just
Not a
sharing
flat roof. It
again.
says that not a flat roof.
Okay, so let's just do a normal roof. So
But I think you
by
showed
default,
this. Do you show this in details
yeah,
in your master class about modeling in Blender BIM? Do you cover this?
I
Did you
do.
cover in
I do.
previous? Okay, it's cool to show it
Yes.
again, but I was just wondering about that.
I'll show it very quickly because it's quite simple, right?
Mhm.
Especially if you're going to do a simple roof. So the default Blender BIM tool, you need to create your own roof type. So this might be the bit that tricks people up. So you got to go to the launch type manager and you have to select a roof type, essentially PURS. I keep going past it, roof type. And you need to create a new type. So I'm going to do a hip gable roof, which is the only version that works perfectly in Blender BIM at the moment. And I'm just going to call this roof 50, right? And we're going to say save new type. You can see it's been added. Took 10 seconds, but I know what I'm doing. So from here, we just need to make sure you've got the create element tool selected because there's no dedicated roof tool at the moment. And then you just click add. It will add it where you've chosen. I've accidentally added it outside of my hierarchy, which might mess up the file. Collapse all of that. Just make sure it's correctly contained. This is another way you can break your IFC file. And then from here, you can just edit it by pressing tab. So there's a edit roof path button, does the same thing. And then this is actually probably the best roof tool I've ever used because it gives you a preview and you can also adjust the edges here. So I'm just selecting the edges. You can see I've got edges selected here and I'm snapping to the different portions. And you can see there's a preview of the shape of the roof. It's obviously not going to be that offset. It'll be where it is. And then I'm going to press tab, or we can just say, just press tab or say finish editing roof path. And then you can see we've got a very simple roof. And then how you want to adjust this is you go to geometry and materials. The roof tool has a roof modifier in parametric geometry, roof, and then you click this little editing button, and you can have adjust the thickness to whatever you want it to be. Essentially, I'm going to say 50 because I said this was roof 50. And then you can adjust the roof generation by angle or height. Often I use height because of height restrictions. So I'm just going to say 2000. And then we have a very funny looking roof. Maybe you want it to have an overhang, which is very normal. We have to finish editing this. I'm going to press tab again. I'm going to go to my plan view. And I'm just going to offset this by 300 in all the directions. 300 minus 300. And maybe we want it to overhang this whole thing here. Minus 300. So there's our preview tab. There's our roof. It doesn't really make logical sense. It is hollow. So doing trusses is a different story, but also not that complicated. But there's our roof. And if we go to our section, you can see there's our roof shape as well. So if I move this up, we can do that. And we can adjust our section position so it cuts through the top. So it looks nice and neat. And then we can say activate and print. And there's a roof. It's there in 3D, it's there in 2D. It's not that complicated. If there is a shape that you don't know how to make, and I understand that like a lot of this stuff, it's unintuitively in a place. Like if there was a roof tool, this would be a lot simpler. But if there's a shape that you don't know how to make, you just model it in Blender BIM, in Blender, and then classify it as an IFC roof, basically. So
Lloyd,
in Blender, yeah.
yeah,
Are we done?
actually, the question, no, actually, his
Sorry.
question was that his problem was extending the walls up to the roof. If you can show that.
Sorry, I completely didn't catch that. So currently, I think it's broken. I think this is what's it? An open issue. So typically, when you extend the walls, you have to have the wall tool. You're supposed to select the walls and then select the roof and then press Shift E to extend, right? But that ends up editing the roof path instead. So I'm going to break my IFC file right now just to demonstrate it. So Shift E, and look at that. We've accidentally edited the wall and the roof at the same time. So I'm just going to press Tab, broke it. That's not how it's supposed to work. So currently that's not working, essentially. But it is an open bug that is currently there. If you have any Python knowledge or anything, you can go and solve it. But it only doesn't work with the roof tool here. So I'm just going to see if I can.
Do you have a workaround for this then? How would you do it if you need to do that?
I would say depends on your needs. For me, as long as it visually lines up, it's fine. But you could also just extend the wall to whatever height is necessary. So if we have the wall here, I can actually do this in the section view. So I could check the height here. I mean, it's not going to align with it perfectly, but 3, 1, there we go. But I can see, okay, cool, we're looking at 290. I can select the wall. I know the height is 3000, so I could say 3 to 90. It's not perfect, but it's extended to a point where it touches the roof there. So that is a workaround. That is a workaround. It's not great, but the tool does work with other things. If you're doing a roof that's made out of multiple other items. So again, this is a work in progress. So if we use the slab, for instance, and that's why my snap's not working, and we added this, just going to make sure I'm in the right space. And we edited the slab to be the right size and gave it a little bit of an angle. 5 degrees. Okay, so we've got a slab here, and it's also got a bit of an angle. So we want this roof to align with that. So this is the process. This is how it's supposed to work. It just doesn't currently work with roofs. So select the wall, you select the slab, and you press Shift E, and the wall aligns to the slab. So the code is there. It was working a few versions ago, but I do think it's currently still. It might have been fixed. Yeah, I'm using a version that's 20 days old. So it might have
Exactly.
been fixed
Why?
already.
Why? Why?
Yeah.
Why are you doing that?
It's just a stable version as a point of reference, Petru.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
Yeah.
yeah, it's not gonna. But yes, so this is technically how it's supposed to work. You select the wall, you select the roof, you press Shift E, and it'll snap to it.
Mhm. You should check
But
the
yes,
latest
yeah,
version, man. If it doesn't work, let me know. Send me a link
I
to
will
the.
check. I will check. I will check. Yeah, but that if you are having this issue, it's because you're using a version where it doesn't work currently.
Okay.
Yeah. So just it's not the IFC. It's not what you're doing. You saw it break in real time, so
It's
it's
a
not your
bug in
fault.
Blender BIM. Okay.
It's a
Okay.
bug. Yeah, it's a bug.
Okay, cool.
Absolutely.
Two other quick questions
Alrighty.
and we'll wrap it up. Would it be possible to model composite walls in Blender BIM and subsequently quantify the various parts?
Yes, it is possible. Currently, it won't visually change. I think this is a very common question. There is a feature request out there which is calling for funding right now, which is to visualize composite walls. But the information is there. So if we select a wall and we go to geometry and materials, and go to materials and this object material, if we go into here and we go into our materials here, right? This is just one material. So I can add several of them. And these are different layers, essentially. So this is the sequence of layers as well. So the 200 will be on the outside, the 100s will be on the inside, and the other 100 will be on the other outside. So if I tick it, and I adjust this wall, so I refresh it, essentially, press Shift E, you can see the thickness has changed because it's accommodating those materials that are added in. But we can't visually see the difference yet. So it all just looks like one big wall at the moment. But we can see now this should be 500. Yeah, we've got a composite wall there. And each of these has their own values. I'm not certain how to pull this information out at the moment, but it is there.
Okay.
I think it might be one item or the other, essentially. But yeah, and then the visualization is its own thing to just like visualize the different materials inside of the wall is a feature request that's currently out there. If you want to contribute, if you know how to code, go do it because it's something everybody wants essentially.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
One last question. When you say store DXF in IFC file, is it like a link to the DXF file as an attribute, or the DXF is translated to IFC point, IFC curve, etc.?
So it's not a link. It's actually inside of the IFC file. That's what I'm saying. You can link a blend file into an IFC file, but I just find that if you have too many links, I mean, this is a problem with anything that has links. It's not exactly clear. The process for Blender BIM changes all the time. So, especially if you have a link and you move a file because of an update or something along those lines, you're probably going to lose the link and then you're going to break your IFC or you're going to lose that reference. So that's why I prefer just saving the DXF in its own Blender file. But again, this is just my personal preference. This doesn't really scale if you're working on something that has like 1,000+ units or something that's tens of thousands of square meters big. But this is probably the safest way. It's the way I don't have frustrations, essentially. Just like I'd recommend everybody to use IFC Git if you want to do. It's not just about versioning; it's about saving. It's about saving and not being worried about. You can always go back to the previous version, essentially. All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, amazing. We got well over time, so we should drop the mic right now, Lloyd. Thank you very much for an amazing session. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining, for asking questions, for resharing, reposting, for commenting. We really appreciate this. I hope this was very helpful for you. And yeah, leave more comments with what else would you like to see. Lloyd, by the way, I saw more people mentioning this. They would like also to see something about how to actually model a 3D geometry model and make it a BIM model. How to add information to an existing model.
Definitely, we can do that.
That's something that I saw a few times. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a good one.